Welcome, everyone. We have a great group so far. We'll get started in a couple of minutes, give folks some time to get into the room, but really happy to have everyone here. We have a chat feature in the platform and would love to know if you all have any questions. If the panelists don't address them during the panel, we'll ask them afterwards. But go ahead and feel free to start posing your questions in the chat. Maybe also pose anything or discuss anything you're looking to learn, during this webinar. All right, we still have folks coming into the room. We'll get started in a minute. All right, we have a few more folks coming in. For any of the new folks coming into the room, reminder, we do have a chat feature at the top of the platform. Pose any questions that you have for the panelists. We'll try to address them during the panel. If not, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Olson, Lead Conference Content Program at MJ BizCon. Thank you for joining us for Data Without the Dashboard, how AI is making cannabis insights actually usable. We're all swimming in more data than ever. Sales reports, inventory numbers, pricing trends, customer behavior, and market benchmarks. It's all at our fingertips. However, when it comes time to make a real decision, that data often sits untouched. Dashboards pile up, teams stop opening them. The people who need the answers most don't have time to dig through charts or wait on a data analyst to pull a report. Does this sound familiar? You're not alone. Dashboard fatigue is real. Adoption is low, and all that information rarely turns into action. That's exactly what we're here to fix today. The goal of this webinar is to make your data usable, especially for the non-technical people on your team who drive business decisions every day. To break this down, we've brought together 3 experts who see this challenge from a different angle: a brand and marketing view, a data provider view, and a retail strategy view. Together, they cover the full picture. Before we get started, I'll introduce our speakers, who I'll mention will also be speaking at MJ BizCon in December. First, we have Lori Parfit, fractional CMO at LKP Impact Consulting and former VP of Marketing at Forefront and Mission Dispensaries. Lori brings more than 20 years of experience, including major consumer brands like Kraft Foods and Beam Suntory. She knows what it takes to turn insight into brand growth, and she'll bring the marketer's perspective on making data work for real business outcomes. Next, from the data side, we're joined by Cy Scott, co-founder and CEO of Headset and co-founder of Leafly. Cy has done more than almost anyone to bring market intelligence and data-driven tools to the cannabis industry. He'll speak to what's actually possible when you connect the right data to the right decisions and how AI is pushing that even further. And rounding out our panel is Krista Raymer, Chief Strategy Officer at C3 Industries and founder of Vitrina. Krista has spent her career translating complex data into practical retail strategies, working with more than 270 operators along the way. She'll bring the retailer's view grounded in what works on the floor and behind the counter. Before we jump in, a quick housekeeping note. This is a conversation, so we want to hear from you. Drop your questions into the chat box at any point, and we'll try to answer them after the speakers wrap up. The more specific, the better. So with that, let's get started. Lori, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody. I am excited to have you here. We have a wonderful panel. As Chris said, my name is Lori Parfit. I am your fractional CMO in the cannabis space. I am very excited to be here with both Krista and Sai, who are experts in this topic. I am thrilled to be talking about it because this is one of the most important aspects of the industry right now, is really understanding your data, and not just understanding it, but really driving decisions from it. So as Chris mentioned, I come from Forefront, and when I joined the industry back around 7 years ago, data was very light in this space, and making decisions was really made almost more in a vacuum with the data that you had in your POS system. And now we've really seen the industry become much more robust. The data is there, it's available. And the real key is, how do you use it? What decisions do you drive from it? And how accessible and approachable is it? And now we have seen the advent of AI and how that is affecting data as we know it. And so programs like Ask Headset, where you can actually query the system versus looking at dashboards, have really been instrumental in bringing data to the forefront and making it accessible for people who don't necessarily have a background in data. So that's all really exciting. So we have a few topics that we're going to be covering today with a bunch of questions. We will leave about 15 minutes at the end so that you can ask questions. And like Chris said, please put them into the chat and we will address whatever we have time to get to. So let's move to our first topic. And so our first topic is really that dashboard problem. So Chris really alluded to this when he started the call, is there's lots of dashboards out there, but the truth is you need to really understand what that data is, how do you access it, and what insights can you derive from it. And so cannabis companies have been told that they need better data, but access to it is really the first step. And so most of the teams in cannabis that we've seen really don't have the staff to really dive into data like you would in a consumer packaged goods company where you have multiple people available who can do that. And so how do you access the data, use the data when you're really limited in the amount of people you have to mine the data? And so that's really the gap that we need to talk about. So dashboards can really show you what happened, but what really comes next is understanding what it means and what you should do next with that data. So let's start with our first question. So where do you see cannabis companies getting stuck when it comes to data? Is it access, interpretation, bandwidth? Crystal, let's start with you.
Thanks for having us, everybody. Lori, I think that this question is actually really dependent on what area of the business sometimes we're talking about. So for us, we are lucky enough to have a data team that supports in all of the other operating teams within the business. With that data team, though, they're not necessarily always the ones that are doing the analysis. Sometimes they're supporting with the analysis, but oftentimes it's the teams within our marketing team or buying and planning or retail teams who are doing the analysis, leveraging the data that data and insights team has put together. One of the first areas that we can fall down is what the data fluency is in terms of everybody speaking the same language about what a KPI is, what it means for our business, and is it coming in from the same sources. So right now we're thinking a lot about, as we're building out dashboards, where is this data coming from? What are some of the assumptions or the things that we need to know about what's in that data? And then how does that show up, say, for example, in a dashboard? So I'll use a really easy example. Units per transaction versus items per transaction on the surface seems really straightforward. But actually within our business, it's kind of complicated when we get into things like deli. So we offer deli flour that then shows up as items per transaction, whereas units per transaction might normalize something like all of the deli flour based off of a strain and make it one unit. So you could be having those two KPIs side by side within our dashboards and it look like a average units of 3 in a transaction, or it could actually be an average item per transaction, which could look closer to maybe 6, depending on how that transaction was executed. So it becomes really important for our teams across the business to understand what is the underlying definition of the KPI, what information goes into that KPI, and then how do we present it back to the teams. And then even within that, like what that means for different teams. So items or units could mean a different thing for a buying and planning team, a retail team, or a marketing team. And so how do we have shared language around that?
Awesome. So what I really hear you saying there is it's really about how do you make sure that one, you define, so KPI is key performance indicators. So how do you define that? What does it mean for each team? And what data does each team need in order to make that decision?
And that we then have shared understandings of what that looks like. So that we have a good understanding that buying and planning uses this definition when they're looking at these reports, so that when we are sharing information or insights about the business, that everybody knows exactly what they're talking about.
I love that. So it's really about getting that consistency. So everybody is talking in the same language when it
And
comes
that's
to the
really
data.
hard. That's
It
really hard.
is. It is, especially in this industry where, like you said, you have different units of measure, you have different product categories, you're looking at a lot of different aspects of the business. So being able to align that can be challenging.
It absolutely can be. And we're lucky to have a central team that can help pull that together. But in an environment where potentially the information isn't being centralized in that way, it becomes even more difficult.
Absolutely. So, Sai, you run a data company. You run Headset, which is one of the leaders in data for the cannabis space. And you really work to make the data more accessible and approachable. And, as we see, a lot of teams, they don't have a lot of people. Krista's very lucky that at C3, they do have so many people that can analyze the data. But on the whole, there's a lot of companies out there that just don't have that. And so a lot of them struggle to go back to their data consistently, even when they know it can help the business. And so, what are you doing on your end to make sure that the information is more approachable and accessible for these teams who don't necessarily have a great background like Krista does in data?
Yeah, thanks, Lori, and thanks everybody. It's an interesting. I love this topic, and it's fun to start on the dashboard problem because a headset is built on dashboards, so we're we're very well aware of the challenges with it, and we're coming from a world in cannabis where data was hard to come by, and as Chris mentioned, now we're all more or less drowning in data if we want to be, and I think to your question here, Lori, is like, are people looking at it consistently? And we know operators, and Krista can certainly attest to this, people are busy, right? And many operators, depending on the size and scale of the organization, have potentially bandwidth challenges. They're doing a lot, they're wearing a lot of hats, right? And so even just looking at any sort of data in the first place is a huge win. And then looking at it consistently and in a way where you can actually, interpret and make decisions is an even bigger win, right? So that's certainly hard, has been traditionally hard to do. We've tried to do things at Headset, like pushing the data out. So while you can, have dashboards, it can get delivered to your inbox and places where you might be, or make it accessible in third-party platforms, so wherever you might be, you don't have to go out of your way to get the data. But I think, what we're going to be talking about today, and kind of this intersection that we find ourselves at, which is I think a wealth of data on the cannabis industry, from Headset, from other operators, from internal business data, you name it, combined with what's going on with artificial intelligence and these tools that we have access to now, both as we integrate those tools into systems internally at Headset, and as we enable data to come out of our systems so that you can use it in AI tools you're using elsewhere. I think it will kind of change that and flip that around to where people won't have such a challenge to consistently look at the data. It'll become more of a natural thing, particularly when they don't have data teams like Krista's team might have that are delivering it to you, as needed. When you're really, running, wearing all those hats, trying to understand what's going on, and you can't go out of your way to pull that. It's going to get pushed to you, and AI is going to help you do that, and it's going to have access to an amazing amount of data to be able to do that. So that's really where we see it going. The dashboard problem is an age-old problem. Dashboards certainly provide value. They're a baked set of data that help with certain decisions, but of course everyone has unique needs and unique decision-making frameworks and unique measurements, and so you end up with a lot of dashboards for a lot of people, and sometimes you don't end up with the ones that people need. And I think that what we're seeing with these technology trends are going to start to change that, and the consistency of going back into the data and looking at the data is also going to change as a part of that.
So I think that's really fascinating. So, when we think about one of the comments you made there is one I really kind of want to touch on, is that everybody in cannabis companies are pretty much wearing multiple hats. And so we don't have large staffs in this industry. We are all doing a lot of different things all the time. We are pretty much building the plane as it's taking off and hoping the engine doesn't fall out. And so, when someone's wearing a lot of different hats and they're looking at data, but they're not doing it consistently enough, a lot of times they don't remember where. It's not even whether the dashboard has the right data for them. It's which dashboard do I look at? What am I looking at? How should I be looking at it? How can these people who have all these multiple hats really try to understand, what they're looking at and how they find things more effectively? Sai.
Oh, well, I guess it kind of depends on the decision you're making, and knowing where to look at the data for that. But again, when we're talking about from a dashboard perspective, I think that's the approach, right? It's like, what are you trying to solve? But with AI now, it's different. You don't really have to, you really can only, you only have to go to one place, more or less, right? And it's like one interface, and it's like having a conversation with a team member who is an expert on most things in the world. But also, if you bring specific business data, you bring specific cannabis data, and they're now an expert on that as well, right? These systems are amazing because they have a lot of foundational knowledge. It's surprising what they know about our industry, as new as it is. But when you can bring data to it, it knows even more, right? And can get more specific to the need you have. So I think as far as knowing where to go and kind of your question there, eventually it will be like one place. And I think it's pulling that way more and more. And we're seeing it, we're trying to integrate this in systems internally. So if you're, on headset, you can interact with AI, but we also recognize that people are interacting with AI directly in things like Claude or things like ChatGPT, right? And so going there and accessing the data. So I think it will come down to eventually we'll build some habits, and we'll just start to use tools kind of like the way we all kind of Google for things, in the early days of the internet. There were a lot of different search engines. There were listing services like Yahoo that, people would go to. And eventually it's just like you Google these things. I think eventually you're just going to be talking with an AI to get these answers. So you're not going to have to know exactly where to go. But in the spirit of like the dashboard problem, certainly that's still a problem, knowing exactly which dashboard to go to for which decision you're trying to make, and knowing exactly where to look in that dashboard, and knowing how to interpret the data in that dashboard, and knowing how to translate that interpretation into an action. That's a lot of steps in the chain, right? And this stuff will just shortcut that for you.
There's
Yeah.
almost Sorry,
ahead,
Lori.
Teresa.
There's
Yeah.
almost this opportunity. Sorry, like we had previously had a bit of a conversation about this. That is, you have your dashboards for standard understandings that need to be shared across many people, and then you have AI that can be able to support with things like exception reporting. I also think that there is this interesting space in the middle, which we were actually you kind of just alluded to, which is you have the dashboard, and then to be able to have the dashboard that somebody can interact with to better understand it. I sit in this like very privileged position that I had some data understanding before getting into the industry and retail understanding before getting into the industry, but we have so many junior team members in this space that might not have that same level of either retail experience or data training. And so sometimes looking even at a dashboard can be overwhelming without understanding it. And so to be able to give a team a space where they can then query back and forth on a dashboard, never mind like trying to build their own exceptions reporting, but just we have this standard dashboard that gets used a lot, and it shows net sales, gross margin dollars. It also shows new customer rates within the same space. And so if we had a junior team member who needed to understand a trend line in that, could we have that dashboard then have them be able to interact with it without them having to pick up the phone and make a call to ask for that additional support, which could probably tighten up their learnings at times, but also then creates the opportunity for our teams to better understand the shared definitions of how we want to look at the business, whether that be, say, for example, that really simple net sales performance report.
Right. I love that context of the one dashboard or a dashboard that the entire team looks at, because it is a great point. When you interact with an AI chat, it can be hard to share that. They have ways to like kind of share it out, but it's kind of unique to whatever you're trying to answer. And so having kind of one place where everyone goes, everyone's on the same page, everyone's looking at the same information, those KPIs that have been defined, and the expectation is like that's consistent. There is some power to that for sure. And then I like what you're saying about being able to drill deeper, because often, dashboards will, if they're doing a good job, they will trigger deeper questions. Why is this number this way, or what is this telling me, or what should I do about this? And to go from that to the next step, as you're saying, it can be tough without like reaching back out to the team that built the dashboard or having some expertise. So being able to kind of drill in, kind of double click in, as they say, into like that next thing and ask a deeper question to better understand what's going on. That's a great example of kind of that hybridization that I don't know, is pretty valuable.
I would agree with that too. I think having consistent data, but then also understanding what real actions you can drive from it, what decisions you need to make from it, is also really important. Krista, how have you been able to do that with your team?
I mean, right now we're in an interesting position where we've been over the last year building out our own dashboard environment. And that has caused us to take a pretty hard look at like what are those shared definitions that we need to have in place. We also are in a position right now where we leverage things like Headset or Claude, and we have smaller teams doing pilots within different areas of the business to understand how the team is using it. And like these are early days. Like this example of being able to have a dashboard and then make it so that somebody could interact with the dashboard in one space. Like I actually don't have the cleanest example of that outside of one app. It's called Mapzot that allows you to do that currently. And so it typically has existed as maybe team members taking screenshots and then uploading screenshots or downloading the report and then interacting with it in that way. Even those workflows, I think a lot about for our own teams today, which is to say, if I look at say, for example, a trended sales report, I want to understand what has happened so far this year. And I can see that May is less than April. Then what am I going to do to understand that in a dashboard? I'm going to I know the context to which goes on in the industry, which might influence that as an outcome. But then I might say, okay, well, did 1 week in May actually produce like soft results that resulted in all of May looking a little bit soft compared to April? And so I could then go down the path of chasing 4 or 5 dashboards or data sets to try and understand the outcome of that. Or in a world where then we can query against something like that, then you get to a much faster answer depending on what the outcome that you're trying to come to is. And I think that's where maybe historically data has been difficult to track down for things that are longer views than like in this moment, what's the KPI? It's like what is causing, and causation and correlation has been something that I think that this becomes really interesting when you have those more difficult solutions to try and chase after. So I know that like that's our sales trend, but I don't know, for example, if it is because flour had a soft week that week. Is it because we pulled forward demand the previous week with some promotions? Like what exactly created those results? And so if we want to make sure that we don't recreate that situation again, or we have something amazing happen and we want to recreate it, we need to understand what was going on and how those things were connected to each other to be able to put all of those data points into one dashboard. Size probably like, oh God, like it would be so intense and it would be incredibly difficult to see in table. But I think that's where one of the places where our teams are getting strong use out of AI today is how many different data points can we bring together to get a better nuanced understanding of something to be able to connect the dots, which might be difficult to see if you just like look at a table of numbers.
Right. So I like that. So it's really about how do you drive those insights? How do you dig deeper? And what questions do you need to ask to make sure that you understand what your next steps should be?
Mhm. Context
All right.
is super
Well,
important.
absolutely. All right, let's move to our second topic. So this is really about AI as the missing layer between data and decision. And so like we've been touching on this, in this first topic, but the truth is that AI is really new. And so up until, probably the past year and a half, we really haven't seen a lot, with AI until recently. And so AI in terms of data is extremely new in the cannabis space and in all spaces in general. And it's really making data much more accessible. So even with me, like I was utilizing headset and I was on the road and I was able to pull a number that I needed really quickly. And that was incredibly helpful. And it really creates kind of that new level where anybody can really access that data and ask questions and try to drive insights from it. And the goal really is to make people more, make data more approachable and have people really understand what they're looking at and be able to ask those questions in a way that they can drive the insights that they need. So AI is really changing the way cannabis companies interact with data. And so, Sai, I would love to ask you, what makes AI different from traditional dashboards and static reports, and how can it help companies who don't necessarily have a dedicated team be much more successful going forward?
Yeah, certainly. And we, as you mentioned, started touching on this. I think it starts with the accessibility, the democratization of access to the data. Um, Before AI, you really were limited on because of those things we talked about, bandwidth, just capacity, understanding to like be able to get kind of the answers you need. And now it's as simple as just natural language. You're just talking to the machine, and you don't have to know the exact database or the report or whatever that field name is to like pull that information. I mean, a great example is our internal analysts. Historically, to do any sort of work, because they have access to the raw data at Headset, they would be doing a lot of like SQL queries and pulling data specifically, and it gets very complex and very time consuming. And they've essentially switched to just AI interfaces just to interact with our own internal data at Headset, where these people are experts in the domain and experts at getting access to the data, getting the data they need, and they're still using AI because it's faster, it's easier, and it's potentially more nuanced on the result. So you take that power and you put it in the hands of anybody. And that's an amazing thing, right? To be able to do. So I think it starts there. Um, Dashboards, as we've said, it's just about building on a predefined set of questions. And like Krista mentioned, sometimes you try to pack in a lot because you're trying to answer with all this context. And as we know at Headset, we've ended up with a lot of dashboards over time, and it can be hard even internally to know exactly where to go to find that one metric. So, just democratizing that, you can just as simple as asking a question, getting an answer, being able to challenge that answer or try to get more details on it. is already changing the game in the context of how people interact with our software at Headset directly, right? And then this is, I think, the start of, where everything's going, and bringing the data out and bringing it into systems like Claude. Like Krista was saying, teams, and we do this too sometimes, or we have had to do it in the past. You're looking at something, you take a screenshot of the dashboard, and you're like, help me understand what this is saying. And it would, and then it'll say, the next thing you should do is look at this data. Then you got to go back to your dashboards or your reports and like dig out that data. And then you copy and paste that in, right? You take the CSV or you take the screenshot. And you're like, here's the data here. And it's super powerful when you can do it, but you have to know where to go, and you have to deliver the data to Claude. You have to deliver the data to your ChatGPT. So you bring the context, and then it can interpret it. And that whole workflow has just is challenging, right? So it's the world is moving to plugins, to connectors, right? In these tools where you're just in Claude and it's connected directly to the data you're getting from Headset. It's connected directly to maybe the data you're getting from like marketing software that you're using, and all the other information you have. And now it even makes it easier to get information with the extra context to drive those decisions. So instead of having that dashboard with everything, the AI has everything, and you're not having to carry it with you and copy and paste it over, right? So that's happening. And even beyond that, there's some more trends with like agentic. But the short of it here is that it's just getting easier and easier and easier to get the answers you need quickly, in one place. And that's just a huge fundamental change. And hopefully everyone, who's on this webinar has had an opportunity to try that, to, paste in some data, to interact with an AI directly in software like Headset, and kind of can see that pull. You're seeing it everywhere. It's, obviously it's any software we're using now. You see a lot of ask interfaces, if you're buying a car or you're looking up a movie now, it's like, instead of clicking around, you're just type what you want to do and it'll kind of get you there. So I think as consumers of software, we're starting to get trained on that and have that expectation, right? And just getting better at that. And so it's already pulling us there. We're bringing the data in, the next step, and then beyond that, having it do it for you, where you're not even thinking about the question you have to ask, but it's pushing you the answers before you even have to ask the question, is where all of this is really headed.
So I love that statement. It's giving you the answers before you even have to ask the question. So it's really kind of anticipating for you. It's giving you those next steps. So I worked for many, many years in consumer packaged goods, running category management, where, we had the Nielsen's and the IRIs of the world, and there was so much data always at our fingertips. And one of the things that we always found was that, someone would get trained on it. And if you didn't go in right away and really work on a business problem and complete it, a lot of times you forgot where things were, how to do things, what things meant. And then you kind of get nervous about going back in, and then you don't go back in and you don't get the data you need. And so I think, being able to push out that information and really understand what you need to know before you even think you need to know it, I think is really impactful for operators in the space, because it helps them stay on top of it, make decisions, and be able to answer questions that, maybe their CEO or another leader is asking them, and they can answer them quickly because they have that data at their fingertips.
And one quick thing on that, it's a lot of people have had an experience with like ChatGPT in the early days, and the models have gotten significantly better, across the board, no matter what you're using, if it's Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, like you name it. Like, I think a lot of people had kind of got a little soured on it early because it wasn't very smart, couldn't think critically, didn't know a lot about a lot. And the pace of these models and the additions to the capabilities and just like how smart they are, it's pretty wild, and it's happening very, very quickly. And you might be familiar with the headlines where like the US government is limiting releases of these things because they're so powerful and they're so smart, so to speak. So it is like another kind of vector. Another thing that's happening is just as these things get smarter, they are able to do that, where they are better able to kind of more proactively point things out, do work for you, instead of like very basic kind of Q&A, kind of, I'm going to ask this question, is going to give me a quick response. Able to more think critically, if you can get at the data, you can set up, scheduled tasks where it can be running things every morning for you, pushing things to you, and starting to move more into that agentic world. So it's moving quick, and it keeps changing with these models, and they're getting cheaper too.
Oh, absolutely. And I still remember when ChatGPT came out and we couldn't even get cannabis data from it. Like we were asking it questions and it wasn't able to access that information. They were using old data, old models. It has come so far in such a short period of time, and it's incredible to think what's going to happen in the future with AI as it continues to evolve, because just in the past year and a half, we've seen massive transformation. So, Krista, when we think about it from like the operator perspective, how do you use AI to move from what happened to what should you do next? And where do you think human judgment still matters when you utilize AI?
I think about this a lot as we continue to evolve, and we have our own teams and stores and in the different teams that are focused on like, what are we going to do with this information? So right now, the tools are really great at being able to identify patterns within a large data set and then call out that pattern. But they're still not fully nuanced to understand what actions we might take based off of those, because we don't have, say, for example, our full business context built into some of these tools. So how we might approach a situation in Massachusetts is going to be wildly different than how we would approach that same opportunity maybe in Illinois. And so as we build up more business context, we need that human side of understanding where is there different context or nuance by, for example, for us, it's by state as well as by store, to say, okay, well, what do we know that was in there or that influences outcomes accordingly? Because there's something different, fundamentally different about this store. It could be that it's on a border. It could be that it has tourism. It could be that there was like a convention. Long term, we have seen some of this get better, to Sai's point of like being able to identify those nuances and differences between the different retail environments, but we still see a lot of opportunity for our people to catch things like a highway was closed or there was a major storm. Being able to connect that will be helpful. What I think is also incredibly important, and where the person still plays a major role in all of this, is it's reading data that created those results. It's not telling you what didn't happen because there was something not there. And like, I have a very contemporary example of this that I was in stores today in Massachusetts talking about, which is we're taking a look at cashless ATMs and the conversion rate of our customer in cashless ATMs. And there's a change that happened a week ago, and that has changed the results. But we were actually talking about how the fact that the results are likely underreported because the customer changed their behavior before the transaction ever went through. Another example of this is like to say, we believe that a store in Missouri doesn't sell as many vapes. And is it correlation or causation? Did we have the right inventory in the store to sell those vapes or not? And do we have a bias maybe on our team in store that doesn't enjoy vapes as much as they enjoy flower, and that has influenced the way that they sell? Like, that is not in the model. And so we need to continue to leverage humans to be able to derive some of those insights that will never show up in the data record. And I think we've been getting better about recording some of that information so that it goes into our historical results, but it makes it much more difficult when we think about forward forecasting. So can we give it more context about what has happened? Absolutely, there's going to be that possibility. What it doesn't do the best of right now is forward anticipating those like non-traceable data points.
Right. So the nuances. So what I heard you say was context. And really what the human interaction that needs to happen is the context. Because yeah, they don't know that a highway closed. They don't know that that store, all the bud tenders love vape and they don't like flower. You know, all of those nuances are not necessarily just available in the data. So having that human available who understands what's going on and can take that data and say, oh, I understand what the nuances are here, and I can put context around this is incredibly important. And so, you know, it was funny. I was on a panel a few months ago with someone from a POS and e-commerce company, and the tech guy, and he was like, you still need humans to look at the data. You still need people to understand what's happening and give context to what's going on, as well as edit that data and say, you know what, this doesn't really make sense. And until the models really continue to evolve, we won't have that context. And even in some cases, some context won't be available in those models in the future. We still need the humans there. All right, let's move to topic number 3, which is really making insights actionable across the business. And so we have touched on this, and you know, it's great to look at the data. It's great to look at the dashboards. It's great to query the tools with AI. But it's really about, you know, what do you do with that information once you have it? It's nice to understand it and say, well, this drove this, and this issue was driven by that. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to make business decisions. And Krista really talked about at the beginning of this call that, you know, you really have to think about, you know, which departments you're looking at, what decisions are they making, and how do you establish those KPIs and really develop that language. And so, Krista, I would love it if you could talk to us a little bit about what are some of the biggest business decisions where better insights could immediately improve performance.
I think one of the things that we've been working on this year is how we think about briefing in the teams that are going to take actions or need to derive insights from a data point. So recency bias, as we are currently putting together our plans around what we are going to be doing for, say, for example, Green Wednesday and the holiday season. So how do we approach this? I think there's this moment where there are dashboards where everybody could go and chase all of those insights and be able to say, okay, for my department or for my state or for my store or for my email cadence, what do I need to do differently? Instead, we're kind of coming from it from a different perspective to say, how do we actually have a team that puts together this is what has happened last year. This is what we've learned about our holidays so far this year. And then this is some things that we've identified as potentially areas of opportunity for us as we move into the next year, that then team members can take that information and then start to derive action from. So it's not like what were the data points last year, it's what influenced the outcome of those data points, and then how can we take action with those this year and have it in a more consistent shared format that we are going across. In this example for Green Wednesday and holiday, the upload of that information will spread across our production teams, all of our marketing team, our buying and planning teams, our retail leadership, our retail operations as well, all to say, okay, well, what should we do differently this year in Green Wednesday versus last year? Do we need to do anything differently? And what have we learned about some of the other core holidays this year? That we did that for 420, we did that for 4th of July this year, and those have been incredibly impactful in creating real results because we all went into the holiday not just with what are we trying to achieve this holiday? So that's like the core part of the entire brief-in process is like, what's the definition of success? And then what are the insights that you need to have to be able to create success against those metrics? So I would say that that's probably our most contemporary example in terms of big projects. In the everyday, it's been getting down to, okay, defining what our core KPIs are and what teams need to be tracking what when.
I really like that. And so to me, that's post-event analysis and looking at what has happened, what were you doing, and then what do we want to do this year, knowing what happened last year and what our current objectives are going forward. So how do we take that data and really change up how we're doing things to make sure that we're achieving goals and objectives, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, we're getting towards the end here. So I have another question for Sai before we get to questions from the audience, which is, Sai, you deal with companies all day long. So operators, brands, what's the first practical step a cannabis company should take if they want to become more data-driven but don't have a large team?
Yeah, certainly. It starts with looking at the data, so getting access to data. So depending on where you're coming from, looking at your business data. If that's if you're a retailer, a dispensary, looking at point of sale information. If you're a brand, what's going on with distribution and inventory and so on. So getting access to the data in the first place is where it starts, right? You need to be able to do that to do anything. And then from there, using tools to help you. Obviously, I'm biased here at Headset with the tools we have to kind of help with that. So kind of going into what we provide at Headset, obviously the dashboards, what we were talking about earlier, give you that kind of consistency across the organization on maybe some key metrics, but then using the tools that we provide to be able to drill in and talk to the data more or less in a natural language is a great starting point as well, and pretty light lift. I would say explore subscriptions to software services like Claude from Anthropic or like ChatGPT on team plans that are pretty good. We do that internally at our company, and I'd encourage everyone to do that same thing. You can build out skills and share those skills across the organization so that teams can use kind of some of the same information and kind of get everyone on the same page more or less, so like starting to anyways. And you get access to the AI models, and with those subscriptions, depending on the level of subscriptions, you can get access to just more turns on the chat. It's limited based on like what level of subscription you have. There's a concept of tokens and token usage, and didn't really get into any of that nuance, but often that stuff's abstracted on like team plans for certain things. It's nuanced if you have like programmers using things like Claude Code and so on. But I would encourage people to go to do that, and then start connecting your systems into those tools is a great spot, and just getting really comfortable with what those tools can do for you, and start to look more into kind of the agentic framework where you can take some of those actions like Krista mentioned and use AI as an agent, as a team member, and say, this is our goal, this is what we're trying to do, this is what our work has shown that we need to do based on AI chats, and then whatever you're doing to get that information, and then let's monitor this and let's improve this and let's see how we do and measure this consistently and keep pursuing that goal more or less, right? So you can kind of baby step into it all the way from you need to make sure you have access to the data and the systems where that data is, and getting that in a place that you can use, and then tools and software like Headset, and then bringing those tools and software to AI systems where you can combine other tools and software is kind of a good path to kind of go from 0 to 100 here with AI.
I think that is great insight. And so, what I've really gotten from this discussion is dashboards are great. And as long as you're all speaking the same language and you know what's in there, they're really important to be looking at your business on a regular basis. But with the advent of AI and being able to query and ask the questions you want, to know the answers to and to drive insights to actually move your business forward, you really now have the opportunity to have more approachable and accessible data. And you can utilize that information to drive real business decisions versus just looking at what happened and saying, what do we want to do next? It's really what happened and how do we adjust it so it's meaningful going forward. All right, so we are getting to the end of our prepared questions. And so, Chris, I'd love to turn it back to you with some of the questions that we've received from our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. This has been a great discussion. I've learned a lot from it. We did get a question from Joshua Gilstrap, who asked, how do you view data security when adding LLM models to your tech stack? Is the solution redacting the answer, walled gardens, or a combination of both?
I could take a pass at it. With the tools like the subscriptions, I'm not sure exactly, if you're looking at Claude or ChatGPT, but often the information that you put in can and will be used for model training, unless you're on, more of an enterprise plan, or you connect directly. Like if you're integrating LLMs into your own tech stack, often you're paying on a token basis. So you're paying for the data going in and out of the AI systems. And in those cases, generally, they're not using the data for model training, right? And this is how organizations are using LLMs to do coding and so on, where, you don't want your proprietary code to be used for someone else if they just ask, tell me Google's algorithm or whatever, and it has it because it's looked at Google's code, right? So there are ways around it. I think you just need to be mindful of how you're interfacing with LLM. But if you are bringing it in via their APIs, then I think generally you're okay from a data security perspective. But obviously you can read their terms of service. I think if you just go to the free Chat GPT and you dump all your company data in there, they can use that for training purposes. So, be sensitive to that for sure. Redacting answers, definitely want to do any of that before you put it in, because once you put the data in, it's in, right? So if there's sensitive stuff like customer names, PII type information, for sure, redact that stuff as best you can, or pay for the more enterprise tiers where that is not ingested by these companies. So they all vary how they do it, but it's a great question. It's something to be mindful of.
I'm not a technical expert, but one of the exercises that was helpful for our team when thinking about this was also if we think that there's any intellectual property that exists within the workflow or what we're trying to query back and forth about, if it's kind of like standard process within the industry, it's probably less something we need to be concerned about. But if it is something that, to Sai's point, has sensitive information or is our own unique workflow that we think is unique only to C3, it's also something that we're very sensitive about which type of model it might go into, and is it going into an enterprise account, and we don't want it like out there rogue in somebody's personal account. I think that for us, that also meant different things for different teams. So there's different sensitivity around some of the things, for example, within our marketing team, because we also have consumer data within that data set than, say, for example, maybe consistent workflows that our finance team deals with. So we are always having to make that assessment based off of what team is in place, as well as what options we have that data is potentially getting shared with.
So when I started working in AI, someone once told me that, you should pay for the enterprise solutions because either way, you're paying. So if you take the free version, you're paying because you're giving them your data to train their models. And if you do more of those enterprise versions, they're not using that data. So you're just paying the fee versus providing them with the training for their systems. And as somebody who works with a lot of different companies and has a lot of different companies' information, from my perspective, it's really important to make sure that you're protecting that data at all times. And so really thinking about the system you use and what you're paying for and what level you're utilizing it at is going to be really important for security going forward.
That's great. Really great insights. I have a question that I was curious about. AI is giving us the ability to run queries to help analyze the data, but curious to know if you've had any colleagues or customers use AI to develop customized software solutions that maybe complement out of the box software solutions. Everyone's experimenting with AI and developing their own tools. Have you heard of any interesting solutions that folks have built to help analyze their data?
I can speak from an operator side, which is we are currently working on something like this. So we have 2 cultivation facilities, and within those facilities, there are a lot of different data sets that are not currently connected. So say, for example, things like sensors and then total weight output. So we are working on something to be able to bring those together and then be able to drive insights against. Hopefully in an optimistic world, we can get to a place where we have a better view of what type of labor we need to be scheduling to facilitate a packaging schedule. But all TBD as we put together all of the data points and work through building a custom solution to be able to do that. But it's something that we think is interesting in its day-to-day application, and where we could make a lot of our team members' lives probably easier by making that information more straightforward and easier to collect.
Yeah, I've seen it from a few organizations as well out there that are building their own bespoke software systems using data sources like Headset. I think the barrier to software is come down, quite a lot, and you can build, kind of custom interfaces. And I think a lot of that need is driven in a big way by our industry and the nuance of our industry, market to market. Different markets operate very differently. If you're in Arkansas versus California, and the way you need to do ordering and reporting and all of that. And sometimes that can be hard to take off the shelf software and just make it work for you. So you're seeing people kind of build their own setups, including their own SOPs and just how they do things. Like an example of that is an organization is doing ordering and inventory, kind of better understanding it, and they're pulling in their Headset demographic data to kind of understand who the customer is for those products, so they can make sure that they can service the demos as needed, right? And it's not something that we have simply out of the box in our software. They just incorporate it into their own system. And built it, I think, with Claude, probably Claude Code or just straight Claude. And so I think it's very early days. It's kind of like we're all using those old brick cell phones, if you remember that, or even like a flip phone, but we're not anywhere near an iPhone as far as how this stuff is going to be used by everybody. But it's really interesting to see this stuff happening, because I think a few years from now, 3 years ago, we didn't even really have this. And now, 3 years from now, I think a lot of people will be running their own custom software where it takes all these data sets and displays it, and it produces it in a manner that makes sense to their organization.
From my perspective, one of the things that AI has allowed people to do is not just analyze the data and query the data, but it's also allowed people to kind of become programmers who have no tech background, who would never know how to write code. There's a lot of tools out there that provide that for you so that you can build your own system. And even in our company, we're building our own internal system with agents and things like that to really help drive some of these insights going forward and make ourselves more agile and efficient. And it's just allowing people who don't have that background to really be able to build out these systems who could never have done it before.
And I would say, if you don't know where to start with something like that, if it sounds like a big leap, like I had chat make a dashboard for me, but how do I turn this into software that my team can see? Just ask it. Just say, hey, I want my team to be able to access this. And then it'll guide you to how to set that up or how to get it deployed out there and make it accessible to whoever you need.
I love that. All right. Well, we're at the very end of our call. Chris, are there any additional questions?
with the time we have left, we won't be able to address them, but this has been really informative. I love the last question. Thank you for the answers to that question. You know, the MJ Biz marketing team has been experimenting with, you know, different AI tools. So loved hearing your answers around, you know, what all of you are working on. But thank you all for presenting on this. This has been very insightful. We'll have another webinar on September 3rd. Keep an eye out for the next Buzz email that will be coming out next Tuesday on that topic. If you haven't already subscribed to the Buzz newsletter, please do that. But we hope to see you next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.